Hi, I'm Emily, and I'm going to show you how to decorate a cake inspired by Kate Spade. You'll need 2 cakes for this design, at least 2 inches apart in size. I'm using a 6-inch strawberry cake with coconut filling and an 8-inch chocolate cake with coffee filling. Apply a crumb coat to your cakes and cover them with white fondant. For more details, watch my tutorial, How to Build a Cake. I'm going to make 3 peonies to place on my cake. I'm using these peony flower cutters in graduated sizes to make my flowers. I'm making them with fondant mixed with a generous pinch of Tylose powder so that they'll dry hard and hold their shape. First, shape little buds, holding them against the smallest flower cutter to check for size. You want the petals to be able to wrap almost all the way around the bud. You can press your flower cutters into the top of the bud so that if there is any showing at the end, it will look like there are petals wrapped around the bud. Roll out your fondant as thin as possible. Cut out 2 of the smallest flowers and 2 of the next size up, and then you'll probably only need 1 of each of the next sizes. Place each flower on a flower sponge and use a ball tool to rub the petals. This makes them even thinner and also gives them some movement, so they curve naturally. Brush the center of the flower with a wet paintbrush and then wrap the flower around a flower bud. To do this, place the bud in the center of the flower and lift up 1 petal, pressing one side against the bud. Lift up the next petal and press the whole petal into the bud so that it overlaps over the petal you just pressed onto the bud. Continue around the flower, tucking one side of the last petal underneath the first petal you pressed into the bud. For the first flower, we want to almost completely cover the bud. Attach the next flower, but this time, don't press the petals onto the flower. Let them stick up a bit. Attach the next flower, which is a bit bigger, and let the tops of the petals hover above the bud. Continue with a few more flowers, using a slightly bigger one each time, and letting the petals spread open more and more with each one. I'm going to make a peony bud, which will only have a few rows of petals wrapped around it, and a small peony, with more petals, but not as many as my big peony. Leave them to harden for at least a day. If the outer petals are quite open on your flower, you can place the flower inside a cupcake wrapper to hold its shape, or use little objects like frosting tips to support the outer petals. I'm rolling out white fondant as thin as possible and cutting out circles with a round cutter. These are going to be polka dots on the cake. I'm leaving them to dry and harden slightly before painting them with gold luster dust mixed with clear alcohol. You'll probably need to do a few coats to get a solid gold colour, but make sure you wait for the paint to dry between each coat, otherwise your paintbrush will pull off the wet paint. We're going to make the bottom tier striped with the signature black and white stripes of several Kate Spade designs. I'm going to use one of these fondant cutters to cut my stripes the same width, but you could make cuts on either side of a ruler to get the same effect. Roll out black fondant as thin as you can, and then use your fondant cutter to cut your stripes. You'll want the stripes to be as flat as possible against the cake. Make sure the stripes are long enough to wrap all the way around your cake. To check, wrap a piece of string or ribbon around your cake, and then hold that length against your stripes. I'm cutting out 3 stripes, and this will give us 5 stripes on the cake, 3 black and 2 white. You can do more or less depending on the height of your cake. To work out how wide your stripes need to be, measure the height of your cake and divide it by the number of stripes you want. That number is the width of each stripe. My stripes are too wide using this fondant cutter, so I'm thinning them with a pizza cutter. I'm just eyeballing the width, but you could use a ruler to be more precise. Now I'm going to roll up my stripes so they'll be easier to stick onto the cake. If you don't roll them, they're likely to stretch as you move them around. If you've used powdered sugar or cornstarch on the work surface before rolling out your fondant, this will help the fondant not stick to itself. If not, you can dust the back side of the stripe with a bit of powdered sugar or cornstarch before rolling. Use a paintbrush dipped in water to wet the base of your cake so that the black stripe will stick to it. Choose which is going to be the back of the cake. If you have a crack in your fondant or one side looks a bit lumpy, that will be the back. Of course, you'll want the prettiest side of your cake at the front. Stick the beginning of your stripe onto the back of the cake and unravel it around the cake, pressing it gently into the cake as you go. It's easiest to start at the bottom because the base of the stripe sits on the board, so you don't need to line the stripe up. It's an easy one to practice before attaching the other stripes. When the end of your stripe meets the beginning of the stripe, if there's any overlap, just place the end over the beginning and use a sharp knife to cut through it. Use a bit of water to attach the end of the stripe to the cake. You can use a fondant smoother to press the stripe even smoother against the side of the cake. Now we'll do the top stripe. Same as for the bottom stripe, use a paintbrush dipped in water to brush around the cake, and then roll up your stripe and unravel it around the cake, lining it up against the top of the cake. Start the stripe above the point where you started the last stripe, so the join is also at the back of the cake. Trim the end of the stripe and stick it against the cake. For the middle stripe, you can either eyeball where to stick it or indent a line around the cake as a guide. I'm indenting a line where I want the center of my stripe to be. You can also hold the stripe against the cake without applying any water to the cake so it won't stick, and use a knife to indent along the top or the bottom of the stripe. Then you can remove the stripe, brush the cake with water, and then stick the stripe to the cake, following the line you indented. Voila! Looks great! Now we're going to stack our cake before decorating the next tier. To see how to do this, watch my tutorial, How to Stack a Tier Cake. Apply a thin black strip around the base of the top tier. This gives some continuity between the two tiers. Just use the same technique as you did for the stripes of the bottom tier. If you have powdered sugar or cornstarch on the black fondant, use a damp paintbrush to brush it off. Don't use a wet paintbrush because it will leave a shiny glaze behind. It's best to use a clear alcohol like vodka instead of water, because it doesn't make the fondant sticky and leaves less of a sheen than water. Next we'll apply the polka dots. The fondant and gold paint should have dried, so you'll be able to lift them up with a spatula. Paint the back of each dot with a bit of water and stick them onto the cake. Given the size of my polka dots and the height of my cake, I'm going to do mine 2 polka dots high, spacing alternating columns. To space the dots evenly, I'm applying 2 dots, and then spinning the cake and applying the other 2 on the opposite side of the cake. I'm using another dot as a guide to show me where the opposite side is. If you imagine a clock, the dots are now at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Now I'll put dots at 3 o'clock, and then just fill in the gaps with another 2 sets of dots. Cover the rest of the top tier with gold polka dots, and now just place the flowers on. I'm using toothpicks to attach them, since they're big and quite heavy, and I want to make sure they'll stay in place as the cake travels to its final destination. Now that the flowers are on the cake, you can see that the backs are quite angular and don't look natural. I've cut out some more petals and rubbed them with my ball tool, and now I'm placing them around the top of the big flower. One more, and 2 little ones on my small peony down here. Ta-da! A cake inspired by Kate Spade. If you follow this tutorial, please tag British Girl Bakes on social media so I can see your creations. Subscribe to my channel for new cake decorating tutorials every week.